Does philosophy weigh in on your sense of or interest in fashion?
Yeah, it does,
I
as a
would
matter of
really like
fact.
to hear about that.
Well, there's a whole book about fashion, which I haven't had, have it in there, but I haven't read it yet, unfortunately.
Philosophy and fashion?
Yes, I'll
Okay,
show it to you after we're
please.
done. Fashion, or following fashion to some extent, is a commitment to living in the present within a group of people who also care about fashion, many of whom are not intellectual, are rather shallow by our standards. They're not people we'd like to be like, at least given what we think philosophers should be. And don't forget that philosophers, ever since the ancient times, had a reputation for being dressed badly. All the satires that are philosophy are dirty and, dirty beards and everything. I think that, again, to engage in fashion and to even think about how it is that fashion changes, which I think is a very, why does it change? Is it only commercial interests that make it change, or is it some other broadly cultural, more broader cultural factors? I think that's interesting. What's the difference between fashion and progress? Is philosophy more like physics, or is it more like fashion? Is there fashion philosophy? And of course there is fashion philosophy, and we need to take account of that. Also, the fact that you connect with a group on one axis does not mean that you identify with them in all axes. And furthermore, and I think that may be a personal confession that does not making me particularly likable, it's a way of being different. It's a way of being different. When I first got a job in Pittsburgh, I had to go downtown to sign my lease. I went to this business building with a friend of mine from Carnegie Mellon, and we had hair out to here and jeans and whatever. It's 1971, to whatever. And we get in the elevator, and there are 5 other people, all of them wearing a suit. I turned to my friend and I said, "Look, they're all wearing uniforms." And he said, "So are we."
That's good.
So you can't avoid fashion.
Right.
The question is, which fashion
Yeah.
and whether it's acceptable or not. I remember many years ago, my teacher, David Furley, talking about another colleague of ours, said, we really should get him a pair of trousers of which the pockets don't have holes so that his pens don't constantly fall out. It's okay to do that in philosophy. But that's the thing. We don't care about material things. But it's not an essential feature of philosophy that you don't care about material things. We all care about material things, one way or the other. The question is, what kind of material things? How important are they in your life? Whether they intrude on the rest of your life, on the things that you consider important or not. So I think there are philosophical issues in everything. No matter what, you can find something that would be recognizable, at least by people with relatively open minds, as philosophy. Now, unfortunately, much of philosophical talk begins with "that's not real philosophy." I think that's a terrible thing, because real, in that case, functions as a perfectly negative, exclusionary maneuver. It's metaphysical. One about the things that I loved about being in Pittsburgh is that for 15 years, I never heard that expression. Never. Even people with completely different interests of mine, were willing to take me seriously as I did them, even though we're doing things that, had almost no intersection. There was no overlap between them. Other places, you hear it more. And generally speaking, it's not real philosophy, means it's not the philosophy I respect. But that's not a metaphysical point. That's an expressive point. And sometimes you can say that's not real philosophy in the sense of saying this is so different from what we do that it's not something that I want to deal with. Sometimes I'm tempted to think about that in connection with people in comparative literature. Sometimes, not always. I think but I can be pretty intolerant too when it comes to it. I don't want to project this image of myself as this, wide open, tolerant man who, is willing to acknowledge the good in everything. No, there's bad in everything too. Sometimes more than good.
How do philosophical considerations manifest themselves, if they do, in what you wear? You personally, I'm curious. Do they manifest themselves? I mentioned earlier, last time we met, you had a monogram on your shirt, which I really liked. It's not something that you ever see anymore these days.
It also embarrasses me a bit.
Does it?
Yeah. They're very comfortable shirts, so the hell with it. And what I was thinking actually was maybe I should have made and not put my initials on them. Because it does suggest, well, I get my shirts made, How I dress, I try to dress simply and comfortably. Basically, I was actually thinking of interviewing you, of having you interview me in my pajamas.
Really?
Because when I'm at home, I'm in pajamas. They're much more comfortable than clothes. I don't see why we're not allowed to them outside. The Indians wear them. I don't see why we shouldn't. It's so much more comfortable than wearing all these constraining
Interesting.
things.
I try to dress nicely at home too. It depends on what one. I'm wearing jeans right now, but
they're unusual jeans.
They are unusual jeans, but I just enjoy being surrounded by beautiful things, and I don't see why one can't have beautiful pajamas. I'm totally
You can.
I'm totally open to that.
It's just I find them much more comfortable. The first thing I will do when I come home is take off my clothes, put on my pajamas. When workmen come and I say, "Look, I'm not sleeping. This is my working uniform." In fact, but there's something. You get the sense that people think that either you're not a totally real intellectual or you're not totally committed to the academic life, or you're just trying to make a kind of Wildian impression. After all, he does say that if I'm occasionally overdressed, I make up for it by being always immensely overeducated, which is a great line. But some of it is historical. My parents liked to dress well. They got me to put good clothes. And also, good clothes are by and large more comfortable. And if they were custom made, they're even more.
Do you think that there are good reasons to sacrifice comfort for personal style?
It depends. Yeah, absolutely. Many people do. I don't think it's always
high heels are a good example, probably.
Who?
High heels, just as a garment.
Yeah, I never understood how people can do that. I still find the fact that women have to make themselves up as much as they have to, as opposed to men, except for Trump, unfair. I don't think that unfair, patriarchal, whatever. But yes, I think sometimes looking good is a way of being good.
Could you say more about that?
I don't know. It just came to me.
It just came to you? Looking good is a way of being good.
In some cases, it's the right thing to do to look good. For one thing, if you go to say a party or a reception and you are, on purpose, badly dressed by the standards of the party, you're making other people very uncomfortable. They don't know how to deal with you.
It's also a way of showing respect at certain functions.
Exactly. It's a way of not being different. And sometimes I think that, and also, if you believe that well-made clothes are good looking, then there's a prima facie reason to wear them. because it's better to look good than not to look good, unless you think that looking is not at all important. And that is the view of some philosophers.
Yeah, not just
But
philosophers. A lot of mainstream people also feel that way.
But I think that's completely wrong. And I think the distinction between looking or seeming and being is not that different from distinction between being and meaning that we were talking about before. There's a fantastic report of an experiment done in Michigan about beauty. They focused on the rowing team of the University of Michigan. And before the season started, they asked people to rate each other for attractiveness. They had a ranking. Then they did it again at the end of the season. And it's very different.
Interesting.
The people who came atop were also the best rowers, the best teammates. And the interpretation they gave of this is that it was a physical attractiveness versus sort of human attractiveness. And say, no, it doesn't. In other words, outer and inner, looking, being. No, it has to do with your first impression, where you have very little evidence to go by, and your final impression, which takes in much more. So somebody who looks good usually promises that there's more good inside. Doesn't always work. And very often we are very disappointed. But when in the proverbial philosophical situation where you enter a reception and there's this face that strikes you, you're not seeing just a shape. You're seeing a face that has expression. And its good looks are a promise that there's more good stuff in, and you want to know it. That's why when you're attracted to somebody, apart from just staring at them, what you want to do is go meet them, get to know who they are, see what makes them look that way, so to speak. So I think that, I guess I'm very suspicious of qualitative distinctions of being, meaning, looking, being. I think that they're much more often a kind of continuum between knowing less and knowing more. So I don't like levels. Did we talk about the experiments about faces last time we were together?
No.
They've done a whole series of experiments on cultural agreement on beauty. So if you show people 10 faces, 10 pictures of faces, people will have extremely different rankings, Then the more pictures you superimpose upon one another, the more agreement you have. Why? Well, the current explanation mostly is beauty is averageness on a biological level, because averageness is an indication of health. And what you're looking for is men look for women who are average, because average means that you haven't had any diseases. Because if you have a disease, you don't develop in the same way, where your arm or your eye or whatever goes in a different direction. So averageness is health. Men look for healthy women for children.
Is it average or symmetry?
It's average.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll come to that in a minute. And women look for dependable men. It turns out the best examples are when they take a picture of a face, they cut the two halves, and then they make it symmetrical. Then they add more and more symmetrical pictures, and people love it. The explanation, however, is that that's, the biological basis of beauty, and then you add intelligence, sensitivity, whatever. So you have a layer cake view of what beauty is. And I want to say, it's not like that. What those judgments of beauty are with those pictures are the most elementary judgments on the least possible evidence that we could possibly have. And when we're dealt something like that, we're going to use the broadest categories that we are privy to, and our broadest categories are biological. So of course, we're going to do that. But that doesn't mean that that's real beauty or the biological basis, because if we get to know those people better, our judgments are going to diverge, because the biological part, though there, is not what they all presuppose. It's just what you have. So did you ever see Papillon, that film? It's about this guy who's at Devil's Island and who's starving. And after, I don't know how many days he's without food, he grabs a cockroach and eats it. So I want to say, he's reduced to his basic biological level. He'll eat anything that has any protein in it. Does that mean that what we really like to eat is cockroaches? And that souffle is, no. You'll eat whatever is available at that point, but if you give me a souffle, I'll take that even more. So it's again, it's not a matter of layer cakes. The same thing about works of art. It's not plot, meaning, theme, as the old view was. Jaws, The Old Man and the Sea, and Moby Dick have the same plot. Man pursues fish.
Yes.
Now everybody says, well, the whale is not a fish. That's
yes.
okay. Melville has a whole chapter on that. But that doesn't mean that. What does that mean? The plot of Jaws is very gripping and very simple. And I stayed up a whole night, didn't sleep all night to finish the book. The Old Man and the Sea took me a little more. Moby Dick, it took me years to finally get in. If you ask me what the plot of Moby Dick is, if you knew nothing about it, I'd say it's a man pursuing a whale. If you know something about it, I'll tell you something much more complicated about Ahab and this. If you're a scholar of Moby Dick, I'm going to assume that you know a lot of it, and let's talk about what does that particular thing that Ahab does at that particular point mean. Taking all the other things for granted, everything that we take for granted is plot. And then we take and say, what does this mean? Once we know what it means, it becomes part of the plot again. So again, you have a continuum. And this notion of a continuum in many of our activities and many of the objects that we deal with is crucial to me, absolutely crucial. Maybe I'll write something about that.